After 2 years together, my girlfriend ordered me to pretend I was just a friend, so another man wouldn't know I existed. She erased my place, flirted with him in front of me, then smeared me as a jealous control freak when I refused to stay her hidden backup. Their emails later got them both fired. But she didn't expect me to return her own words at a wedding. I'm Alex, 29, software engineer at a mid-sized tech company. Sarah and I had been together for about 2 years when this happened. Not casually, we had a life together. Shared routines, mutual friends, the kind of relationship where you stop thinking about whether you're in one and just assume the shape of it. She's a graphic designer. Creative, social, the kind of person who makes a room feel like it only got started when she walked in. She had this way of entering a conversation like she'd been the missing element. I liked that about her. I'm not going to rewrite history and pretend I didn't. The dynamic between us was simple enough on the surface. I was the stable one, not as a compliment to myself, just as a fact. She'd call at 11 p.m. when a client went sideways and I'd stay on the phone. Her HVAC broke in February and I drove over and figured it out. When she was between jobs for 3 months and quietly panicking about it, I didn't make it into a thing or keep score. She was louder than me, more fun in rooms, better at arriving. I was better at staying. I told myself that was what love looked like in practice. That being consistently present was the same as being valued. That showing up without being asked was a language she understood, even if she didn't always say so. I'm not sure when those things stopped being the same. Looking back, I think it was always a gap I was just choosing not to measure. Early on, maybe 8 months in, she said something I filed away as a quirk. We were on the couch, nothing specific going on, and out of nowhere she said, "I'm afraid of getting too comfortable, you know? Like, I never want to stop wanting things." I laughed. I said that made sense. I thought it was one of those things people say when they're in a philosophical mood. A feeling, not a fact. It was a fact. I just wasn't the one it was about. We had good mutual friends, shared routines, a rhythm that worked on the surface. I'd been to her work events, she'd been to mine. I thought we were solid. I thought I knew what we were. The party was a colleague's birthday, a rented loft in the city, dim lighting, a bar set up in the corner, exposed brick, the kind of space people rent when they want something that feels less like a party and more like a moment. Nice crowd. A lot of people I didn't know. I did what she asked. When someone from her office introduced himself, I said, "Hey, I'm Alex." Just Alex. No modifier. He nodded and moved on. I got myself a drink, stood near the windows, and told myself this was fine. Just a work party. She knows these people differently than I do. This is probably not worth making into something. Then I watched her find Marcus. She'd mentioned him before, some guy from work, a startup idea he was developing on the side, something she described as genuinely interesting. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but I watched her cross the room toward him, and something changed in her when she got there. She was different, brighter, laughing more, and differently, the kind of laugh that's partly performance, the kind that says, "I want you to think of me as someone who laughs like this." She touched his arm when she made a point. He leaned in to hear her better. I stood near the drinks table and watched this happen and kept my face neutral. At some point, a mutual friend appeared beside me, one of the few people there who actually knew about Sarah and me. He glanced across the room at her, then back at me. Then he asked, straightforwardly, "How do you know Sarah?" I paused for maybe half a second. "We're friends," I said. He looked at me for one moment too long. Not long enough to be a scene, just long enough for me to know he'd registered something. Then he nodded, and the conversation moved on. In the Uber home, Sarah was electric, talking about Marcus's startup concept, how interesting he was, how alive he seemed. That was the word she used. Alive. I let her finish a sentence. Then, quietly, "I'm not going to do this again." She went still. "What does that mean?" I told her. Not dramatically, not with a raised voice. I said that tonight had told me what I needed to know about where I stood, and I wasn't willing to repeat it. That asking me to erase myself so she could work a room was not something I was going to absorb. "You're being really weird right now," she said. I didn't answer. We finished the ride in silence. The next morning, she texted at 7 asking to talk. We met at her apartment. She said she just hadn't wanted things to be weird with her work people. She said Marcus was just a coworker, someone she talked to about industry stuff, nothing more than that. She said I was making something out of nothing, that this was a me problem, that I was reading into a completely normal party. Then she said, "You're so predictable, Alex. I didn't actually think you'd do something like this." I asked her what I always did. This, she said. And when I pressed her just once to name a specific example, she shifted in her seat and said, "This is exactly what I'm talking about." I went home. I sat with it for a while. Not dramatically, just the way you reread a document when you know you missed something and you need to find it. 8 months in, my company's holiday party. She spent 45 minutes in the corner with my VP, deep in a conversation about the intersection of design and product strategy. She found me near the end of the night. Ready to go? Like I'd been the one keeping us there. Like I was the reason we hadn't left already. About a year in, her birthday. She spent it with work friends. I'd offered to fly back early from a trip. She said not to bother. It was just a casual dinner. I found out later through someone else, it had been more than casual. And scattered across all of it, the introductions. Every time. This is Alex. Just Alex. No context, no relationship, no reason someone would remember me after. I had learned to fill in the blank myself and smile and shake hands and pretend the blank was intentional. In one comment, maybe 14 months in, that I had genuinely taken as a compliment. You're just so predictable, you know? In a good way, I think. In a good way. I think. I sat in my apartment and went through all of it and thought, she was never fully in this. She liked having me. She didn't want to be known as having me. Those are different things, and I had been treating them as the same thing for 2 years without ever naming the difference. She told me at 8 months that she was afraid of getting too comfortable. She meant it about herself. I just hadn't understood that I was the comfort she was afraid of, the steady, reliable thing she kept close because she knew it would be there when she needed it and stepped away from when she didn't. I had been the thing she came back to. I hadn't understood that returning was all she'd ever planned. Within a few days, I started hearing things through the edges of the friend group. Not directly. It never comes directly. It came through careful phrasing, a check-in text worded a little precisely, a comment that landed sideways, someone using the word intense with a direction to it. Sarah's version, as best I could piece it together. I was jealous. I couldn't handle her having male friends. I'd overreacted to a normal work party. Things had been tense between us for a while. She'd been feeling suffocated. She'd needed room to be herself, and I hadn't been able to give her that. She told it with just enough vulnerability to make it travel. A little bewilderment, a little sadness, the tone of someone who genuinely couldn't understand what had gone wrong. She knows how to make a room feel things. She'd always been good at that. One friend texted me, "Hey, just checking in. Sarah mentioned things got kind of intense. You okay?" I read it twice. Typed back, "I'm good. Thanks for checking." Another, a few days later, "I hope you're all right." She said it got rough near the end. I'm okay. I just needed to be honest. I didn't defend myself. I didn't send a counter-narrative. Didn't reach out to people to give them my version. Didn't explain the Uber or Marcus or the way she'd said it so casually while looking at her own reflection. I let her have the story. Part of that was dignity. Part of it was something colder and more patient. The story she'd built depended on Marcus being a normal coworker and me being someone who couldn't handle that. And I knew not with proof yet. Just with the quiet certainty you develop after 2 years of paying close attention to someone, that Marcus was not a normal coworker to her. She had more surface area than me. More group chats, more events, more people who'd known her first. Her version was going to travel faster and farther, and I couldn't do anything about that, and I decided not to try. I'd watched her introduce me as just Alex for 2 years and said nothing each time. I figured I could survive being called a little controlling for a few weeks. About 6 weeks after the breakup, a friend mentioned in passing that Sarah had some work drama. He didn't elaborate. I didn't ask. A week later, another friend mentioned it was something with a coworker. Still vague, still no details. I said that's rough, and we moved on. Then, about 2 weeks after that, someone who worked adjacent to her industry, not at her company, but close enough to the network to hear things, mentioned that there had been an HR situation. Emails had been involved in the investigation. Both people had faced consequences. Sarah had been let go. I sat with that for a few days before it arranged itself into something I could actually look at clearly. Marcus wasn't a work friend she'd gotten a little too friendly with at a party and felt guilty about afterward. What was between them was serious enough that the company opened a formal investigation, serious enough that email records became evidence, serious enough that both of them lost their jobs. She'd come to that party with me, while this was already in motion. The "just say you're a friend" request wasn't a spontaneous decision she made in the car. It was logistics. I was the stable, Long-term part of her life she didn't want Marcus to see while she was figuring out what she wanted him to be. I was the thing she was managing around. I didn't feel vindicated. I want to be clear about that. I felt something more tired than vindication, like finally understanding a sentence I'd been reading wrong for a year. Not good. Just final. And then, quietly, over the following weeks, the same social network Sarah had used to carry her version of events started carrying a different one. Nothing announced. Nobody sent a message or convened a conversation. But people who had heard jealous, controlling, couldn't handle her having male friends were now also hearing, through those same channels, what Marcus actually was to her. The HR situation wasn't a secret. These things rarely stay secret. The frame she'd built depended on Marcus being casual. He wasn't casual. And once that became common knowledge, the frame didn't need to be argued against. It just stopped holding up in the places where it needed to. I hadn't said a word. I hadn't needed to. She'd built her story on the assumption that what happened at work would stay private. It didn't. And the same informal network that carried her version of me carried the real version of Marcus. That's all it took. The text started a couple of weeks after the breakup. Can we talk? Then a call I didn't pick up. Then another. Then a voicemail, tired, reasonable, she missed me, could we just get coffee? She didn't want things to end like this. I listened to it and didn't respond. A few days later, another voicemail. More urgent. Why are you doing this? This is cruel. And then a fourth one, which I almost didn't listen to. I'm glad I did not, because it changed anything, but because it clarified something I'd been half asking myself. Her voice was flat in a way I hadn't heard before. She said, "You're the only person who actually knows me, Alex. I don't understand why you're throwing this away." I stood in my kitchen and listened to the whole thing. Then I put the phone face down on the counter and blocked her number. Not as a power move. Not to make a point. I had nothing left to say, no version of this conversation that ended anywhere other than where we already were. I wasn't punishing her. I was just done. I put more into work. The promotion I'd been deferring for 6 months, the one I kept putting off because I was always managing her schedule, her panic calls, her 11 p.m. emergencies, I stopped deferring it. I stayed late. It felt like momentum instead of avoidance. I'd forgotten those could feel different. I went out more. Spent time with friends who knew me separately from Sarah, people who didn't have a version of me filtered through her perspective. A colleague introduced me to Emily at a work event. Drinks table, end of the evening, low stakes, neither of us were particularly trying. She asked what music I actually liked, not what was currently cool. I told her. She made a face, the kind that's almost offended. "That's deeply unfortunate," she said. I laughed. A real one. It had been longer than I'd realized since I'd had one of those. 8 months after the party, Jordan and Kim got married. Mutual friends. Good people. The venue was outside the city, an evening reception, the kind of wedding where the food is actually good, and people stay until late and nobody checks their phone much. Emily and I had been together 4 months by then. She said, "We should go." I confirmed the RSVP without thinking about it, the way you confirm things you're genuinely looking forward to. I genuinely was not thinking about Sarah when we arrived. That's the thing I want to be clear about, because it matters to how the rest of this happened. I didn't have a plan. I hadn't mentally rehearsed anything. I hadn't thought about what I'd say if I ran into her, or what her seeing Emily might look like, or whether any of that was even a possibility. We got there, found our seats, got drinks, ran into people I hadn't seen in months. Good evening. I was in a genuinely good mood, and I was just there. 20 minutes in, I looked across the room and saw her. She was alone. Dressed carefully, deliberately, actually. The kind of outfit that requires thought ahead of time, not something you land on by accident. She was scanning the venue with a stillness that looked casual but wasn't. I recognized it. I'd watched her walk into rooms for 2 years, and I knew the difference between her being comfortable and her working out the geometry of a space. I felt nothing dramatic. Something more like, oh, the low-level recognition of a problem you used to carry and no longer do, the specific lightness that comes from that comparison. She registered Emily before she acknowledged me. I watched her take that in, the registration, the recalibration, whatever she'd been planning for the evening, adjusting in real time to account for something she hadn't expected. I didn't go over. I went back to the conversation I was in. About 20 minutes later, the reception did what receptions do. People drifted toward the bar and conversations naturally merged. A loose group formed, me, Emily, 2 friends from the original crowd, including the mutual friend who had been at the loft birthday 8 months earlier. The same one who'd asked me, "How do you know Sarah?" and heard me say we're friends and looked at me for just a moment too long. He was standing right there when Sarah drifted into the edge of the group. Someone turned to her, not me, just someone in the group, naturally, the way you turn to include someone standing nearby, and asked, "How do you know these guys?" Before she could answer, I turned to her and said, "She's someone I used to date." 4 words. Calm. No setup, no edge, no deliberate pause before them. Not a line I'd prepared. Just the true and simple version of what she was. Her own request. Returned without ceremony. She opened her mouth. She didn't say anything. The mutual friend from the loft went completely still. He looked at me for just a moment, the way you look at someone when you finally understood the context of a story you heard months ago, out of order, and everything just arranged itself. He'd been at the party when I said we're friends. He'd heard her version of events in the months between. He was standing here now, and he was doing the math. The conversation kept moving. Someone refilled a drink. Someone made a comment about the toasts. The moment passed the way moments do when they don't need to be extended. Sarah said something I genuinely don't remember and drifted to the edge of the group and then wasn't in it anymore. I didn't watch her go. About an hour later, she found me near the bar when Emily was across the room with the bride. "You look good," she said. "Thanks," I said. A beat. "I've been going through a lot lately." "Yeah," I said. "I heard. I hope things get better for you." I meant it. I wasn't performing warmth and I wasn't being cold. I just had nothing else to offer. No questions, no openings, no room in the conversation for it to become something. It lasted maybe 90 seconds. She excused herself. I let her go without watching. I went back to where Emily was sitting. She looked up when she saw me. She reached over and took my hand. She didn't ask where I'd been. I didn't explain. The rest of the evening was good. Better than good, in the way evenings are when you're not carrying anything extra. A week after the wedding, a notification from Sarah's number. I didn't open it. I reblocked the number and moved on with my morning. In the weeks that followed, something quiet shifted in the friend group. Nothing dramatic, no announcements, no group chat reckoning. But the friends who had been texting me careful check-ins, the ones who'd used the word intense with a direction to it, stopped framing me like someone who'd done something wrong. The energy just changed. Gradually, and then all at once. Part of it was the HR situation. By then, it had filtered through enough people that the "he couldn't handle her having male friends" version of events had no premise left to stand on. The story required Marcus to be casual. He wasn't. People knew that now. Part of it was the mutual friend who'd been at both events. I don't know what he said, or if he said anything at all. But he'd been present at the loft birthday and at the reception. He'd heard we're friends and then she's someone I used to date, with her version of the story running in between. Whatever he did with that, quietly and in his own way, I think it mattered. The promotion came through 2 months after the wedding. I texted 3 people. Emily was the first I told in person. We went to dinner, the kind where you don't look at the menu much because you're just talking. From what occasionally reached me through people we still had in common, which was less and less as the months went on, Sarah was freelancing. Whether she'd rebuilt things with people who'd quietly stepped back, I don't know. Whether there was anything further with Marcus after the HR situation resolved, I don't know. I stopped tracking at some point, and I can't tell you exactly when, only that I noticed I had. Not as discipline. Not because I was still angry or still carrying anything. I genuinely don't need to know. I ended up writing this out because someone in another thread described a situation that sounded familiar, the same shape of thing, different details, and I've been thinking about what I would say to an earlier version of myself. That version, the one who said okay in the Uber, who filed the HVAC and the birthday and the predictable, in a good way, I think comment under acceptable costs, that version would have found a way to stay, would have adjusted, would have told himself that absorbing the cost of someone else's ambiguity was what good partners do. That being the steady thing was its own kind of love even when it wasn't returned the same way. He would have been wrong. He would have kept being available and called it commitment and slowly become someone he didn't recognize. There's a version of you that someone keeps on standby. Not necessarily because they're a bad person sometimes, just because you're the steady thing they haven't had to fight for yet, the option they can always come back to when something else doesn't work out. They'll keep the door open just enough. They'll leave a voicemail and tell you you're the only one who really knows them when they need to believe it. Maybe they're even right about that part. But you're not a backup plan. And the moment you stop being available for that role, the moment you say, quietly, I'm not going to do this again. You'll find out pretty quickly whether you were ever anything else. I'm glad I stopped being available. I'm glad she's someone I used to date.